This is the Team Objection Podcast for December 14th, 2021, episode 509. Pay no attention to the cryon at the bottom. It's wrong. It's right on at least some of these slides. I know that much. But today's been a day, I think, for just about everybody in some respect or another. But here we are. We're live. We're with you. And we're looking back on our very first episode. It's going to be interesting. How big that word is, interesting.
Did you do the homework, Dave? Did you do the homework? Did you listen to the episode?
I did listen to the episode, yes. I did do that.
So Dave listened to the episode. I already knew the answer when I asked him. And he was like, I have at least one thing to share. And I'm like, cool. I have like a thing full of notes for the whole episode.
Well, see, some of us actually have jobs that we actually have to do things at.
Yeah.
As opposed to
You know what? That doesn't apply
today.
anymore.
Don't start that today, because the stories I would tell that we get myself fired about today. Oh, let me just put it this way. We went from one plan last night to another plan early this morning, despite the plan I tried to put in place last night, to a third plan that rendered the first two plans useless, all in the span of about 4 hours. All because we had this big winter storm. It's part of why, I mean, most folks who watch the podcast aren't too worried about this, but we're not going to be recording NBA tonight because a few things. One, we were all busy as fuck, and the other one is like, I'm not sure Cody would make it home afterwards. We're about to get slammed. Not by an unprecedented storm, it's more like just a really sudden burst of a storm. So, a lot going on.
It was interesting to look at your weather report and see at 11 o'clock there is a 100% chance of snow. I'm like,
yeah.
100,
we had the 6 months snowfall for like the city. Our city has the 6th most snowfall in the U.S.
Yep, and people are always surprised by that when they're not from around here, especially when I talk to people from other states, especially anywhere past, like, well, I mean, the Mississippi, but even the middle of America doesn't really have any idea that there's that part of Arizona.
Yeah.
But
So,
okay.
First episode, though. Hooray! I'm so excited to do this thing.
It was February 13th, 2011, I think was the first episode's day.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit of background. So it was a long time ago. That's a great picture for those of you who are watching. We were not anywhere close to that sophistication by episode 1. I'm pretty sure I was in a closet for episode 1 for multiple reasons. 1, we didn't have a lot of space. 2, I was really shy. So I was like, I want to seclude myself or I'm gonna like get frazzled and lose my train of thought, which actually, if you've watched the show, happens a lot of the time anyways, but that was a way to protect myself. I was in the closet. We had a weird echo. We had me and Dave in opposite ears. It was the whole thing.
That was one of the things listening back to the first episode that really, it didn't drive me nuts. It was just intriguing of like, okay, it was almost like I was playing a tennis match. I'd be like, Sean and I were on my right, and I'd look over to the right. I'm driving my car listening to it. I'd be like, I want to look over this way. And then I'm going to look over this way because Chris is talking. Then I'm going to listen back to Sean and me. It's just almost like a ping pong game.
We were probably responsible for at least a couple deaths.
I mean, I wasn't
for other people doing that in the car.
To some extent, I blame your dad for that. So for those who don't know, who weren't around back in the beginning, Dave's dad, Tony, was instrumental in a lot of different ways at the start of this. He helped me pick up some of the equipment. He was a lot more familiar with all this because he's done a lot of audio engineering work. He's been in bands and all that jazz. He's a lot more familiar with all this technology than I was back then. When he was recording us in this setup, which we did for some of the intros and some other things eventually, he would actually pan those things intentionally a little bit. Not hard like it was on this one, but I didn't have that option. It was either hard left, right, or dead straight in the middle with all three of us. He kind of gave it some subtleties, so it was almost like a surround sound kind of approach. If you could picture like a diagonal, since some of you can't see the video, that was the idea. It did not translate well when A, the microphones were bad anyways, B, they had to be hard panned to both sides, and C, because there were 3 of us, and I couldn't put anybody in the middle, that meant 2 of you were on the right, and I was on the left.
I don't even remember what I did for a mic. If I was in the closet, that means we didn't have the Yeti. I don't even think you had the Yeti yet.
No, you had a headset, probably a really shitty one.
It was just bad.
I had a slightly better one, and you can tell from the quality. And while I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I think there's big takeaways eventually, the one thing I have to say now because we're talking about it is no matter what, it was still worth it because it's much better to start a podcast and see how it goes than blow a bunch of money on equipment and find out you suck at it. Yeah. You have nothing to say. You have no chemistry. Like, just if you are interested in doing this yourself, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give now is just do it. Sit down in a room with a microphone that's on a laptop and just record yourself doing it. See what it sounds like. Go from there. Do not start by spending $500, $1,000 on equipment and then finding out you don't want to do it.
Yep. That was Chris and I before we even had Sean. We're like, we should do this podcast. And Chris and I literally did like a mini episode where we just shot back and forth.
I
and
didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Wow, you guys are like the OGs.
We have an episode 0, basically.
Man, there's an alternate timeline where this podcast is way better because you two just stuck to the two of you.
No, it was bad.
It was not good.
Now, him and I would have come into our own over time, and we've done shows without you that are just fine now. But back then, I mean, this episode 0, I don't even think we really sold it. Neither one of us, I think, brought our A game, whatever that was at the time, because it was like, this is clearly a fake. So both of us are kind of going through the motions. And as we all know back then, we weren't very good at going through the motions.
Yeah.
The stunning part is the agreeing and then letting the silence hang for a second. It's like, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, well, I'll get to that too because I'm embarrassed. So Chris last week, so rude, so fucking rude, was like, I was very monotone.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe it. I was devastated. I went back and listened, and it wasn't as bad as I thought actually, but there were other things that were really bad.
Well,
and I'll get to that.
To be fair to myself, I was talking more about the radio show because you 150% are all of us more so back then.
Yeah.
Before we started doing this format with each other, because you guys didn't know Eric worth shit. We were covering sports you didn't know, especially in the case of Sean, because he really liked mostly basketball. So those were where you were really monotone. Episode 1 of this, not so much. Compared to now, but not compared to
honestly, relatively, it's pretty monotone. So I'm going to get to all that later, but starting at the intro, I was reminded. Do you know how long the intro lasted? I timed it actually.
2 minutes and 16 seconds, I think it was.
I could guess. I would guess 1:40.
I had our intro. Maybe I timed it at a different spot. It was 100 seconds. So 100-second intro. And like, that's like way too much. Way too much. We had multiple clips.
Yep.
I mean, looking back, it was great because I think the thinking was in this clip, you're going to get a little bit of each of the people that are going to be talking and they're going to say a funny thing. And it made a lot of sense. But going back with our snappy intro the way it is now, like each of us had multiple lines. Like, oh my God, this is really long.
Yeah, it was funny hearing the length of it. It's like, hey, there's another clip. There's another clip. And while that's good to introduce who you're listening to, and we had a shorter one down the road where we were like, it was a 30-second one where we did different music and had one line for each of us. And that was better just because it is good to introduce who the people are on a podcast. But yeah, it lasted long. I want to say that at one time I mentioned that to Chris. I was like, I think this might be a little long to listen to. And you're like, no, this is what the other shows do. This is definitely what we need to keep doing. And that was like 50, 60 episodes.
Yeah, I was a big fan of it. And it's way too long. And I think it would have been fine if it had only been for episode 1, but we reused it for a good few dozen shows. And at that point, it had long overstayed its welcome.
Yeah. And I liked it, man. You know what? Early on, it was enough to just kind of like you said, like get it out. And then once we're like, okay, we've been doing this for a while, we can actually start talking about maybe refining this. Yeah, I'm proud to be a Kingmanian. That was actually a later one, even. So I don't think that was one of, or I missed it if it was. But if I had, okay, my recollection of the first episode before I listened to this was Vince Carter. And like, we just spent like in my memory an hour talking about Vince Carter and that was it. If I had told you don't know Jack review was the first thing that we did, would that surprise you? Did you both remember this?
I do remember it, and I remember Chris introducing it with, coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about You Don't Know Jack, which...
Wow, your memory is so much better than mine. I was listening. It was like a new review I was listening to because I didn't remember any of it.
Yeah, to be fair, I remember that one well, if only because I've listened to it a couple times in the 10 years since. I think I did it around episode 200 because that was one of those like milestone episodes, and I wanted to go back and look. So, I mean, I'm a little bit more familiar with it than somebody who hasn't listened to it since then, but it was the same idea. Like, I remember the first segment was just reviewing that in about a 15-minute block where we kind of put the game through the paces, not in a manner dissimilar from how we do it now, just not as well.
Well, so here's what we got started on that I was so amazed to see about the dynamic. So, I'm kind of known as like a bully to Dave now. This was absolutely not the case early, and I blame Dave for this, actually. I was so nice the whole episode, and Dave burned me so many times. There was one, he said I had a bad brain. It was an awesome... Where are your digs these days? You never have good digs anymore.
He might have beat it out of me, or I felt bad. Like,
No,
I don't know what it
you
was.
burn me so often. And what I hate, well, this is what I meant when I'm like, some things I did okay, some things I did bad. Is like you insult me, and I'm just like, oh... and then it's dead air. I have no retort. I have no defense. I just sat there and took it. I had nothing interesting to say back.
It was weird hearing the dichotomy of ourselves 10 years ago, because it was us, but then again, it absolutely was not us at the same time, which now the fact that we have 10 years of episodes is really interesting if I listen to this 10 years from now when I'm apparently, when I'm going to be a different person. So it was really interesting just to hear how you reacted, how I reacted to everything, even though we had a lot of the same interactions.
Yeah, like Dave had a great Mark Hamill burn.
I did.
And I was just like, oh, right. And like now I would say like Dave is the Mark Hamill of like our show, like could have been a star, never really went anywhere, kind of on the third wheel. Back then I had nothing. My brain was just slow. It just didn't work yet.
So you're telling me I can live a life where I have, millions of dollars, live in relative obscurity, but still can get paid to make appearances and then do kick-ass voice cameos? That actually sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, now that you put it that way, that's actually, it could have been you. But instead, you're on this podcast with us.
Because I burned Mark Hamill. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's no coming back from that.
Yeah. I had a beef. I just want to say this isn't related to the first episode, but when Tony in our 500th was like, since when did you guys start like cussing? And I was like, oh, so you haven't listened to about 300 episodes. Okay. So I have to throw him under the bus, Mr. Alleged producer, not even listening to the product.
So what was funny about listening to the Unit Object part for me was when we talked about it, we almost talked about it as though everyone in the audience had played it already. It's like, listen, this review is so for you if you've played it, and we'll talk about it. I feel like I tried to describe things, but not very well. I was like, yeah, there's this one question where they talk about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That was great. And I'm like, that didn't mean anything.
In the moment, you're like, this is the best explanation ever.
Well, I thought it was nice that you did that because nobody else gave an example of what these off-the-wall questions would be. But then again, you also kept trying to throw it to me to explain things. Be like, oh, well, there's this thing in the game, and I'll let Chris explain what that's about. And I'm like, okay. I can do that, I suppose. Doug, Dave is not the Joker or the Fire Lord unless he's the Fire Lord after his powers have been removed.
I don't know who the Fire Lord is, but I do know who the Joker is.
Everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. What's next?
So, we had bumpers. And, I mean, a hilarious bumper. To go back to Tony again, I don't know what he was trying to do or sound like, but in like slow motion, he was like,
well,
no, that wasn't Tony.
That's me.
That's you? I thought it was Tony.
There was a version of that with him when we
God.
got rid of that awful version and replaced it.
So in the first episode, though, that was him or you?
That was Chris.
Whoa.
It was me.
I can't believe you sounded like Tony. It was so deep.
I don't know what I did. It was some cheap trick in Audacity or whatever.
Maybe it was like, good lord. It was like really slow motion too.
Yeah, you like slowed it down and like stretched out the bass line or something like that in Audacity, so it was headline.
And then so we had headlines, and then Molly starts talking, which I didn't forget. Of course, like I knew that was the whole thing for a long time, but it was kind of refreshing. I was like, this is kind of nice if it wasn't so janky. Like we made it sound like, I don't know, she was in the next room in the studio. If you knew the process, dear listener, which I guess we can tell you now, we always just sent her the reads like the night before. She would do them and then send it back to us, and Chris, using magic, would edit them together.
And there was a stretch where she was doing those in Korea.
Yes. And you would write them, and I could tell that you could write them because I can hear your kind of like funny writing as she would say the headline. It was never just like super straightforward, so that was cool. But
yeah,
I miss that.
I'm a voice in my writing type.
Exactly.
So I write like I sound, which is good most of the time, and it makes it simple for me, but it's noticeable.
Look, Molly's dead to us, and I know that, but she did a pretty good job reading him too. Like,
if you want to come to Phoenix next week, you can see her if you want to.
No, she's coming.
Well,
she's gone.
It was one of the smart decisions we made. I mean, you can look at a lot of the bad decisions in this episode, but this was one that made a lot of sense. Even at the time, we thought it's three dudes. We could use a female voice to break things up. We don't have anybody on the show as a regular at that point, so this is the route we're going to go. And her parts are the most striking of anything because other than saying her name in the world's deepest voice, we don't even introduce who the hell she is. People can put 2 and 2 together on the last name, assuming that the common last name she and Dave share, in fact, means that they're siblings. And then that's it. And then she's gone. She doesn't appear again. She reads 3 little paragraphs, and then she's gone.
Well, we made her own canon of the thing. She was, in the basement. She had her own backstory. It was great. She's the best part of the show. She was on it for 30 seconds.
Not much to say about the quality level when she's the best part of the show.
Well, when she first started, she was recording them in your dad's studio because she was still around. So she was using all the fancy equipment, and we're over here on like $15 Logitech headsets going... It doesn't sound very good for some reason.
Well, and you got to take the good with the bad. So it's cool that she would read it, but then the necessity of doing it separately meant every time there was an ending, it was not a natural ending where she was waiting for the conversation to die down and then she jumps in. We had to pretend end each segment. And always we would wrestle, especially early episodes. I'm sure at some point we got better, and I'll find out as we listen to it. We're competing for the last line. And you can hear each one of us at least once in the first episode has a line that you can tell we're intending to be the last line of the thing, and then we get run over by somebody else, and that it's fine, but that's a flaw that can happen when you had to do it the way we did.
It was striking too, the sound difference where you're listening to Chris in the left ear, Sean and me in the right ear, and then Molly's here, surround sound,
filling the soundscape.
Yeah, we were the best thing for Molly's career. It just made her sound so good in comparison to us.
Which is why she's out of entertainment now and in teaching.
Yeah,
exactly.
We did it, guys. We did it.
To Josh's point earlier in the chat, he remembers the one with the Molotov Taco Bell guy. There are several headlines that I'm sure we'll get to some of them as we do some of these retrospectives, but I do sort of miss that segment. We could do it better and different now, and especially with this structure. We kind of... I have a note about this later, but it's actually at the top of the screen now, where it's we had a strict structure, and then we went completely freeform, and now we've sort of circled back a little bit. That's one thing we could pretty easily bring back in this format. I've already been doing these live reads of things where I just summarize a YouTube video or a story or a situation. It could come back because Molotov Taco Bell guy and the woman who drove into the bakery, and there's all these different headlines that were just wacky and funny that I think we could bring back pretty easily.
I would really like to. I thought this was really good, and it was fun. I mean, half the time, if we were tired or whatever in a given week, these stories are the jokes in and of themselves. They're their own punchlines. We don't have to do very much when that happens. So, they were definitely fun.
I can't get over. Yeah, I can't get over though how terrified I was to possibly not stay on topic and go off on a tangent.
I have a note about this with multiple question marks.
Yeah, a drinking game. You did it, from what I could tell, at least twice in the first episode.
I had 3.
Twice.
You had 3. So yeah, Dave, and at least the 2 that I were literally okay, back on topic. So you only had one way to get back on topic too.
Which is funny because one of them that I remember, we really weren't even that much off topic.
No, that's what I was saying. I was okay, this is fun. We're starting to get into a cool thing, and then immediately Dave's
No, this is stupid. I can't believe that we'd ever possibly talk about other things that could be possibly entertaining. We have to stick to the schedule.
Exactly. And when it was on topic still, and we were what are you even saying?
It was bad.
I used the structure of the show in the beginning as just a way to kind of gauge how long segments would be and make sure we could keep the conversation going because we didn't have a great feel for it at the time. Dave used it as a crutch. I say that in the nicest way possible, but it was he needed that rigidity because he was not comfortable with the idea of just sort of going with the flow. And we already know he solved this because, again, when you look in the episode 350 to 450 range, sometimes we were just starting a show and talking about whatever for 45 minutes. And the only prep we did before the show started was all right, I'm going to bring this topic up. Okay, I'm going to talk about this thing. All right, click, go.
Yep.
So that's changed a lot.
Yeah, I remember literally reading that article and okay, I have to make this note of what I want to talk about, and I need to make sure that I hit this point because I'm going to lose all track of everything if I don't.
You know what? And I think there's a difference. If we did headlines again, I like to go through and try to find something really funny to think of, but there's a difference when you're doing it because you want it to be really good, and as a crutch, that you can't really do it unless you have it pre-done. And that's where I kind of used to be. Whereas like if I don't do this pre-work, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to say anything, and I'm going to be quiet, it's going to be dead air, it's going to be terrible, I'm going to kill myself. So we're just in a much different place now.
Interestingly enough, there was a suicide joke from you in episode 1, so this is perfect. We really are bringing everything back.
I was like, wow, that's pretty edgelord.
Yeah, and you could tell even after you said it, you were like, oh, oh boy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was okay with it, but I was like, that's...
I agree with Doug in him saying part of him wants to hope that we do the live re-review of the 2011 You Don't Know Jack. That game does hold up, so I am down for that. I wouldn't mind playing that again.
Well, I mean, we don't want to give away too much if we ever do it. The only thing I'll say is it's really interesting looking back on it now, knowing that and its success is the impetus for all of the Jackbox games that have followed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because that one standalone game led to the Facebook game, which led to the first Jackbox party pack that had a You Don't Know Jack in it, which has now just continued into this thing that's growing momentum and latched on with streaming. So it's like, man, that was the roots. I mean, obviously the games from the 2000s were the roots, but still, you could see that being such a linchpin moment.
I don't know if we'd had that much to say, though, because, again, like, I was so pleasantly surprised. I was horrified by some things. I was pleasantly surprised by... It was a solid review for the most part.
Yeah.
We touched on a lot of the things that are good and bad about You Don't Know Jack. We killed the lightning round, which I was happy about. I thought it was pretty solid. So I don't know if there's a new perspective we could really bring other than probably trashing each other more often. Dave is the worst front runner in history, for example, on You Don't Know Jack. If you think you know Dave, just wait until he's beating you by 5,000 points in You Don't Know Jack. I promise you've never even witnessed this before.
You get so angry and it's so easy.
Yeah, it's interesting because Dave has changed Sean in some ways, and I don't know that I see me having changed Sean in some of these same ways. I think it's two key things. One, we already touched on. Dave is mean to Sean in the early episodes, and then Sean ramps that up to 11 on Dave by about episode 12.
And it lasts forever.
It lasts for like 100 episodes to the point where all of us started to almost feel fatigue about it, where it was like, it's too much. The opposite now is true. Dave has been such an asshole to Sean, and specifically You Don't Know Jack, that now Sean is an asshole and You Don't Know Jack too, but really only to Dave. Because there's this festering rivalry.
Jack, when do I, maybe to Lincoln, maybe to Tech Guy, but that's usually good fun. With Dave, it's a blood feud.
It's funny because I don't ever feel like I was trying to be an asshole. I was just happy if I won. That
makes it so much worse. That's worse. I wish I could think of a specific example. Yeah, we recorded it. I'm sure it's on the recording somewhere.
No, it's there. I got some. I had one where I was like, I think I said I locked it in very early. I'm like, wow, yeah, that's an easy one. And then nobody did for a little while, and I almost said something. I want to say something. I said like, wow, I didn't know this was going to be a problem, and I didn't mean it in a weird way. It's like it was just a statement of, wow, I'm
everybody
surprised.
Listening can be like, oh, he's that guy.
I didn't mean for it to be.
Taboo number 1, locking an answer quick and be like, oh, that was easy. You can never say it's easy in a trivia game, because then if somebody doesn't think it's easy, that's shade, And then being like, wow, you guys are taking a long time on this one. I thought it was really easy. Let me remind you, I took those in a second. I've taken at least 9.
And that was naivete, which taught me a little bit of humility, because that was truly a meant of a... This is surprising to me. I didn't expect this.
I'm so glad you brought it up. That's what I'm here for, truly. To teach you humility and other life lessons.
We've changed each other, Sean, apparently. Yeah. That is what's happened.
Yeah, that's true. And Chris is like, cool, I got no growth.
I got fucked over. So.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys.
I've changed the least. I'm going to tell you which of you two has changed the most when we get to the end of the show.
Ooh, exciting. Ooh.
My notes said just pretty good YDKJ review. So
it was pretty good.
It's the thing most similar to what we do now, which is odd because we toyed with the way we reviewed things a couple different times, and yet this seems to be the format we've settled on.
Yeah. So then we move forward to headlines. We get the reads. First headline. We're talking basketball.
Real quick before you go into that.
Oh, sure.
I missed the headline song. It was probably my favorite bumper.
I was talking about bumpers, and I forgot that one.
That was only like 15, maybe 20 seconds tops, which is still a little long for a mid-episode bumper, but I was like, oh, yeah, this song, yeah.
I still don't believe you that you were the voice in that. Like I feel like you're pulling one on me.
I think the next time we went down to Phoenix and recorded in studio, which was Dave's kitchen.
My parents' kitchen.
Yeah. Then we eventually recorded a few little bits and bobs like that to fill in, because I don't think that stayed very long, but I'm sure that's there for the first 10, 15 episodes. Headlines.
Yeah.
See, the manliest man alive.
And so the bumper was cool, and then you get right into Molly. So a very audio distinctive portion of that right in the middle there, which I thought was cool. I actually think was cool. And then Sasha Vujacic. Which
was the first headline we ever spoke about.
Which is funny to me, because when I look back of all the players I've hated, I gotta tell you, Vujacic was a piece of shit, but like not really super high up. But we had so much vitriol at the time, and probably because he was more relevant at the time, the Lakers were more relevant at the time. But still, I like barely even I forgot who he was.
It did bring back memories. I'm like, oh yeah, I did hate that guy.
Yeah.
And it shows you how fleeting sports hatred really is, because I couldn't care less about him and haven't for, I don't know, 10 and a half years, and this was 10 and 3/4 years ago.
You know what, the retrospective, what does he do? Whatever happened to him?
He died.
He went and played in Europe, I think.
Not literally, but...
Well, yeah.
He was apparently engaged to Maria Sharapova. That didn't last.
I was going to look it up, unless you're doing it already. Yeah, I was going to ask, did it last, or did... Okay.
No, it didn't. The one thing I'll say...
That does not surprise me.
While we looked this up, like they were done almost immediately after this episode.
Oh.
As I try and put myself back into my own shoes, which is a weird sentence, I think the idea was... we have the Suns in the second half of the show, so we should put this headline first so it's as far away from that as possible. Which, on the one hand, is not the worst idea in the world, and on the other hand, that's the first headline the show ever did.
Yep.
That was what we led with as we were trying to grow an audience in episode 1, was our heavy hitter, Sasha Vujacic.
Yeah, and I don't think at the time we were like, hey, if we like make it really big, are we aware that this will be the first headline that we've ever done?
That was never.
But we should have. We should have, and we were stupid.
After a segment in which we reviewed, especially at the time, one of the most niche video games you can imagine.
Yeah.
We liked what we liked, and we appealed to those who liked the same things that we did, which is about 3 of us.
Well, and even back then, I will say it was even harder to get overlap. Surprisingly. I think it's easier now to get overlap on things, especially because we're better at like faking it. So when Chris and I, we're going to talk about like a Marvel movie, Dave, just like shut up and like chime in when you can. And Dave will do it. Like he'll find questions and ways to engage. Back then, I feel like if you didn't know something we were talking about, you'd be like, no, please,
It'd be silence.
Please, no.
Here's a 10-minute segment. I'm going to say 3 words during it.
Or you would just veto it because you would be like, I'm not going to have anything to say. Can we please do something else? And to be fair, if you guys both had something that I didn't know about, I would probably do something similar. Or I'd have like 3 like stupid jokes and that you guys would ignore and I would ignore, and it would be terrible.
I will say the next headline, though, talking about Sean and his cell phones on planes, that led to 100 episodes of a narrative.
I was surprised
I
it
don't
was
know how
episode
true
1.
it was. And I have to know how true this was, how afraid you actually were of flying.
You know, it was interesting. So yeah, this endured for a long time. Like probably till now. I could see either one of you making a joke about me flying on planes even to this day from this thing. You know...
Wait, you got to explain what the headline is so everyone knows.
The headline was, it turns out, according to some research, allegedly, like, we'll see.
I still believe it.
That cell phones don't do anything to planes. But you'll notice in the last, 10 years, you still are banned from using cell phones on planes.
You're not now, actually.
What?
They don't care.
I mean, but they still do the message at the beginning.
They say it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say it.
At the same time, the study was always self-evident, because if it were a problem, then you would run the risk of someone accidentally turning their phone on and creating a signal that interfered with tower communications.
Which is what I did.
So all it would take is one, and then a plane would crash. So, of course this was never at least fully true. Could there be a scenario where a bunch of cell phones could somehow block radio transmissions? I mean, maybe. Who knows? But we haven't heard anything about that in the last 10 years.
But we were very astute in saying, who gives a shit about the plane safety? Well, I mean, you don't want the plane to go down. But the main reason is, you don't want to be in a plane in tight spaces with a bunch of people on their cell phone.
Yeah.
That was Chris's point. That was great because, that's the whole thing.
Well, of course, now we have Wi-Fi on planes in which you can watch movies and talk to everyone and, basically act like you never even left. Just hop on Wi-Fi.
That's okay. Now, most people, we talked about plane etiquette, right? Or there was a term that we used.
Your plane time.
Plane time. We should have coined that. We're so stupid. It's too late now. Plane time. And most people respect plane time. If they're going to watch a movie, most people will put in their headphones. Little things like that. Like plane time, it's sacred.
So have you ever had someone try to talk to you and actually have it be an engaging conversation?
Yes to the first part and no to the second part.
I was going to say yes to the first one and very rarely to the second one.
No, it's never. Look, if there was I'll be super vain. If there was somebody I'm like, you could be a love interest someday to do an engaging, sure, I would probably be very engaged. But that didn't happen. No one wants to be there. I'm not even saying oh, she's hot. I'm just saying if there was some real chemistry there or something.
I'm just saying if people are interesting. They have lives.
Yeah, see, we differ on that though. That opinion.
Yeah, most people are like you, Dave, which is why it's interesting that you think they're interesting. Because then to me, it's almost like because your life is so drab, you find any comfort in what they do in their day-to-day life.
Now Chris is doing it too. No, and I will say I respect your ability, Dave, to do. That is my nightmare, is to be on a plane. And actually, this is going to go into the hate round that I think we should do later. But
okay.
So I'm going to spoil it now. When people come to me and they're like, what you reading? That is inherently such a stupid question. If I'm reading something, don't talk to me. I can't do both. Who can do both? Maybe Chris can do both. I doubt that you reading and talking, though, is enriching for the book that you're reading.
Especially when it's a book, because you can just see the book. And if you have read the book or you've heard of it and you're interested, and that's a point, that's one thing. But the generic, because if you're listening to music, first of all, don't talk to people then either, especially women in the gym. But then you don't have a way of knowing unless you look over and see their iPod or whatever the modern equivalent of that is, your phone. But a book cover's right there. What are you reading? Well, let me just turn. All right, now leave me the fuck alone. Thanks. Good interaction.
Yeah. What are you reading? Either you know already or you don't know. Either way, I have to stop doing the thing. Fuck you, dude, for asking me what I'm reading on a plane. Plane time.
I can't figure out that lack of self-awareness. If someone's head is down in a book, they're on a plane. I'll ask you, Sean, if I'm at your house, I'm like, oh, hey, Sean, what are you reading? Because I'm curious. You're my friend. I want to know. But if I'm up to a stranger and I sit down in the middle seat and I see the person next to me reading a book, I'm not going to be like, oh, what you reading there?
Even if you ask me in my house, I'm going to be pissed because I'm reading the book. I don't want to talk, but it would be okay because you're my friend, so I would forgive you. But the people on the plane, I don't forget. I don't even want to talk to you to begin with, let alone take my attention away from my book.
Also, if I'm coming into your house, if I just drove up from Phoenix, I'd be like, hey, Sean, I'm here now. What are you reading?
I'd be like, I'm sorry, I'm reading. This is terrible timing.
Yeah, go ahead and drive home, actually. And the one thing I'll say that's not as mean towards Dave is also the most extroverted out of the three of us. Now, that's not exactly a hard contest. I don't think Sean and I are super introverts, but we're definitely on that side. So I think that lends itself more to Dave kind of wanting to get to know people. It's why him and I met in the first place.
It's true.
You might be. I wonder if anybody would be surprised hearing that if they're listening to the show.
That I'm extroverted?
That you're the most extroverted. Maybe.
If their only exposure is to us through this format.
I don't know if it's crystal clear on the podcast. Maybe it is. Maybe it is still. I don't know.
I am more positive about people than you are.
Yeah, that doesn't mean extroverted.
I mean, it lends itself, right?
Yeah. No, that's like a weird, that's like a humble brag too. It's I don't know if I'm the most extroverted, but I am the best looking. It's Dave, come on. Those aren't related at all.
Mm-hmm. That is not what I said.
Just because you are the best looking doesn't mean you have to come in. It has nothing to do with introverted.
Well, I have the best hair out of all of us.
That's true.
Doug in the chat is mentioning the most people line. And you know what? I think we should go to that more often. I know it's a Trumpism in some respects, but I just kind of like saying a phrase like, people we're talking about. So you don't have to quantify it. You don't have to provide sources. All I have to do is be like, people we're talking about, Dave and his hair. They're talking about it. There's a lot of talking on the streets about Dave and his hair. And you just go,
it's the new hot. Yeah,
man.
Everybody, yeah. You get through a stone without hitting someone talking about Dave's hair.
Yep.
I feel like that's Twitter nowadays, where it's like you post, somebody with a popular account posts like, man, I cannot believe how many tweets I'm seeing about X.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden people are talking about X.
Mhm.
I was on my feed today and I saw, it's like, don't stop. You're making that up. I can tell.
Am I the only one who has this opinion on this tweet that's about to get 150,000 likes? No, probably not. Go kill yourself. There's another one. Now it's just happening all the time in the show because the first episode brought it back.
It's okay. We're channeling it. Jaguar said anyone listening to the show would never think Sean was an introvert, but then he capitalized never, and so now I don't know if it's assumed that I'm an introvert or if it's being genuine.
That's 100% what I think the neutral listener who never started on this before would think.
That's probably true.
Because your energy is the highest and you often talk the most.
That's also true. I do that.
So you would come off as somebody who just is like, oh yeah, super engaged, and it's like when the cameras are not on.
I take a nap. I go to sleep. I can't do it.
You're done.
You know, and I probably talked a lot in the beginning too. I wonder if you were to break down the time in the first episode, I probably still talk the most, but I don't say very little. And part of that is the 45-second hate round, which we'll get to eventually. But it's just meandering. I don't know how to do it. You guys were really good. Like, I hate a thing. Boom. It was done. It was out there. And I was like, I'm trying to be profound, maybe. I don't know. I want to like change the world with my hate round.
You seemed like you were sort of going for like a stand-up routine. Like, let me weave my way through the setup for what I hate.
It might have been. I might have written it down ahead of time, actually. So it might have been more akin to a stand-up routine.
Maybe.
Now it's all just improv.
It's just going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like last week you started with, I hate this woman on a bicycle, and then talked about for 3.5 minutes why you hated her.
Yeah.
That was a much better format for it. And in the hate round, we would have just been like, okay, we get it, moving on.
Yeah, and I didn't pre-plan it, except to say, man, I hate people on bicycles, and that was it.
Yep. And then
that's
your
all
heart
you
spoke.
need now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then we only did 2 headlines in the first episode, which is weird because we normally did 3.
We did not. We did 3.
We did. What? How did I miss the third one?
The third headline was Activision canceling Guitar Hero.
Oh my God, you're right. Okay, yeah. So that was interesting because, and I had notes for this too, so I don't know why I thought we only did 2.
I don't know either.
I took great notes.
That's why I run the show.
Yeah,
I got all the stuff covered.
It was funny because we bashed Guitar Hero, which we should have, but then we were like, look, we like put Rock Band on a pedestal and like, look how much better it did. And now looking back, they both died miserable deaths. Which is kind of sad. I mean, Rock Band definitely
is still alive.
Yeah,
is still getting new DLC.
Yeah,
it definitely is nowhere near the zenith it was back then when there was the whole revolution. But like, Rock Band 3 was still, I think, was either released that year or the year before. Like, it was still relatively fresh, whereas Guitar Hero had been on that downward trend for a couple of years.
I like how I brought up that Rock Band would hinder my ability to pick up girls, as though that were a thing I was ever good at or could do to begin with. Very interesting take from 10 years ago, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
Not great.
It actually is stunning listening to that now, knowing like, oh yeah, Sean's married. And then I hear him talk about, man, yeah, what if I had like a girl come over and she sees the plastic guitar in the corner and just like instantly turned off. I'm like, but Maisie likes Rock Bands, so
which
it all
is
worked
the other
out.
funny thing. Is like she loves Rock Bands, so that's really funny.
More than Sean does. And not to say Sean doesn't like it, but like Maisie's super into it because the keyboard primarily.
Yeah.
So it's funny. You said somebody, I think Chris said like, well, what if she's turned on by it? And it's like, oh shit, Sean met her. It happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but,
it was a late development. That was a pandemic thing, really, after they had already been established. But it turns out that, the parallelism is there.
What's the opposite of prophetic? That's kind of what that was.
Conthetic.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, other than that, it was not a lot to say. I mean, all of our other takes about, Doug brings up a great point. Activision, especially, has not aged well. Rock Band has not aged super well. Guitar Hero has aged terrible. They inundated the market. There's not a lot more to say though, because we nailed it in the headline.
Yeah, and now Activision's all about sexual harassment and all sorts of other fun things that Blizzard got sucked into when Activision acquired them.
Yep.
You mean common workplace appropriate dealings, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No.
That's not how
Sure.
Which is funny. Like, just looking back, this isn't that relevant to the show, but like topics like that did not really come up 10 years ago. Of like bad workplace. I mean, certainly not all the sexual harassment stuff, but even like, oh, that place is kind of toxic to work. Very different mentality. Like, we've come a long way in 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, even longer if you look back. It's we come even farther if you look back even farther. Like if you look in movies, even from the '80s, like Ghostbusters, for example. There's just casual harassment. There's like just very flippant, like, oh yeah, well, I'm not gonna let you go till you sleep with me type of thing. It's like that you can't do that at all. That's just not a thing at all. But it happened frequently in movies in the '80s, and it was totally fine. Everything was happy.
There are jokes and subject matter from movies in the mid 2000s that I'm like, boy, I mean, it's been 15 years, so it's not like it's been nothing, but we have come a long way, and we still have a long way to go.
Even The Hangover, for example, like Bradley Cooper leaning out his window and paging Doctor, F word, not F-U-C-K, but yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's like, oh, that doesn't fly now.
Even going back, we're watching the early It's Always Sunny episodes, and I know the point was for them to be as much of assholes and classless as possible. There's a couple things in that first episode I'm like, yikes. Could definitely get you canceled in a heartbeat these days.
Yep.
I mean, as much as I love Scrubs and it generally had positive humor, that's an episode where JD's in blackface. There's just certain things that we just don't accept anymore. And even as recently as that, there were issues. God forbid you go back into even past the 80s into stuff from the 70s and 60s and 50s and so on and so on.
Yeah. So, the hate round. Can I talk about the hate round now?
Well, can you talk about first of all, I need to mention, we played a legit song in the middle of the episode.
Oh my God, that's right.
That lasted for like 50 episodes, and that's why half of them have been copyright struck.
So if I go back and I'm listening to the episodes, are there just going to be some on Spotify that I'm not going to be able to pull up, or did you actually have to go back and pull it out?
Spotify, I think, has pulled those episodes. They're all on iTunes, as far as I know.
Okay.
I listened to it on iTunes, and it was still there.
They're all on Stitcher, as far as I know, and they're all on TalkShoe. I think only Spotify, probably because some of the algorithms or things they use to go through their audio, has pulled off. Even though it's not that many, the majority of those episodes still exist, so I'm not sure how that works. I think 4 or 5 have been pulled.
Oh, wow. That's not bad at all.
No.
It was a holdover from our old radio show. We're like, well, we've been talking for 25 minutes, so let's break it up and have, something else to listen to. And then it's like, no, let's just move on. That's a much better thing.
Well, and it was especially dumb because it was all being fixed in post. So in studio, and when we had access to the music licenses, it was also a chance to get up out of the seat, go get a drink, walk around for 5 minutes, actually take a break. We didn't actually take a break. This was inserted in post, and there was no purpose.
Yeah.
I did like the song choice.
Yeah, another one that's weird, though. That's like, okay, we're going to make an impression in episode 1, so I'm going to The Bravery. Now, I was super into them at the time, and I still really like their music. They're actually coming back together for a tour next year, which is nice because they've been split for like 6-7 years doing their own individual projects. It's one of those bands that came together from other bands, like the Postal Service. But at the time, I was like, oh, this is a song I like a lot right now. But again, this is episode 1, so we probably should have gone with a song that was more fitting for the three of us at any level. But it's there. It's not awful. It's just strange, especially in retrospect.
Yeah, but what song would have been better for the three of us? You would think Muse, but I go to like Ron Artest's Champion song. That's something that resonates with everyone, I think.
Just, I don't know, that it's amazing, so amazing.
I hate that song. I hate that, Dave.
But it's amazing.
Okay, can I go to the hate round now?
We're going to skip an entire segment if you do that, but I don't have a lot to say about the one in between.
Right. Man, we thought episodes were so long back then. There's so much structure.
It was an hour.
Yeah, holy
cow. Almost on the dot, which is by design.
We had the intro segment, the headlines, and then we had a secondary segment where we talked about the Suns, which anytime you talk about sports, unless you're just 100% right, it's just going to kind of age badly. And we were talking about, man, it'd be great if the Suns, we could maybe get like the 5th seed and like maybe go deep, and it's like we didn't make the playoffs, man. Hey, like shut up.
They were in the middle of a hot stretch, as we noted. They won, I think, 6 of 7 after this episode aired, and then shit the bed.
Anytime we talk positive too about like Lon Babby, like their terrible management, I'm guilty too. But
I was worried because I thought there was a point where I said something positive about him, but then I was like, well, at least compared to what Sarver did when he was GM last offseason, and I was like, okay. All right, phew, I saved it a little bit. All right.
Yeah.
talked very positive about Mikhail Petrus, who didn't do anything after that season, basically.
Yeah, and I was still on the Josh Childress train because I thought he was like a mini Sean Marion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was not, unless he was like miniature in the sense of like, like a speck compared to a
Like
full-sized Sean Marion.
Yeah, we actually spent a lot of time looking back to other Suns playoff
Yeah,
runs.
like the Spurs series the year before.
Yeah, so probably indicative of where the Suns were. Just not exciting. We're fans because we have to be.
But it's sort of telling because we talked about the Vujicic headline and then this segment, and all of our test shows and everything we did before on the radio show was all sports. We didn't really know what we wanted the show to be then.
Oh, yeah.
We kind of went for this mixed grab bag approach, and ultimately the show ended up going in something of that direction, but we eliminated a lot of the sports, especially in like the 50 to 150 range, because I think we walked away from this episode being like, yeah, if you don't care about the Suns, why would you listen to that?
And now we don't care. We're like,
No.
we're going to talk about what we like to talk. I mean, look, we love you. Thanks for listening. But I will say this. When you're on episode 5, whatever that we're on now.
09, it's on the screen.
It's correct now. See, I told you it was right eventually.
Thank you, Dave. It's, it takes a little bit of, sometimes we just have to do what we feel like because otherwise we're going to get like burned out. Like super structure every week, that would be really hard to sustain.
For 500 episodes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why we eventually stopped doing headlines because we had a hard time pulling 3 interesting ones. Because you only have so many wacky and wild stories, and you have to then fall back on other ones. We tried to avoid the political ones for the most part, especially back when we did that segment. So it didn't leave us with a lot of options. Now we'll do 1 headline or 3 or 5 or whatever the hell we feel like if we want to do that going forward.
The golden years I miss. We'll get to this eventually when we do one of these episodes. I miss the like creative segments. So like the secondary segment being Vince Carter and the Suns was whatever. But like then we got into all our stupid named segments and I loved that. That was my jam. All of those.
That was torture for me.
Oh man. I feel like I came into my own on the buzz off and all the stupid things that we did on those. I loved it.
I think you intentionally devised the segment Buzzer Buzzsaw as a way to make hypotheticals and have Dave be uncomfortable the entire time.
Oh yeah. Which one was Buzzer? Was that the interview one?
I think Buzzer Buzzsaw was the one where it was like, you put us in these hypothetical situations and asked us 3 questions based on that situation.
Because I love doing that, and also Dave hates doing that.
Right, because I'm okay with it.
Perfect.
It's not my favorite. I'm not a huge hypothetical guy, but I'm an improv guy, so like I'll roll with the punches, and Dave couldn't stand it, especially back then.
Yeah. No, it was, and then we like leveraged that into like a dating show scenario. We're bringing the guests, and then we ask them to ask the question, and then they choose the winners. That golden years. I'm telling you. It was
then
great.
We legitimately had my wife as the person asking the questions on one episode, and she didn't pick me.
She did not choose you.
It was disturbing, but we are still married. We got this.
I don't know if she chose. I think she chose Chris. Because I think Jason is the only one who's ever chosen me. And that was it. I was my favorite segment. I never won. Actually, that's the theme of the show. I never win at anything.
That was a good running gag, actually, specifically that segment, because you had the most creative answers and lost every time. Every time.
Dude, I think literally one time someone was like, that was too creative. I'm going to go with Dave. And I was like, what?
It was very difficult for me to do those segments because I would think of something and be like, okay, man, I actually thought of something. Like I have an idea and I'm gonna run with this idea. And Sean would be like, Dave, that is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, what kind of moron thinks this up?
Yeah, but then you would know. Like I was gonna say that no matter what. So in a way, it shouldn't.
At the time, I didn't.
Doug calls Dave a buzzkill for hitting those segments. First of all, got him. Second of all, buzzkill was what eventually became time capsule because the idea was that you were being a buzzkill on the things on your youth. There was a method to the segments before Sean ruined it.
But my ruining it did ruin it. But it was like it was like satire. It was like I took it too far because we did it all the time. It was intentional.
Yeah, I mean it was good satire. It was also what made us stop doing those segment names because it was too far, and we went, okay, this is.
And we rebranded the entire show.
Yeah,
so.
We can't be a self-parody. We haven't earned that right. We're not big enough to be that. We can't do that. Yeah, I will say the one segment I miss, and we'll get to some of these later too, but like Hall of Fame, we got pretty late in the game, kind of after a lot of other segments had fallen off. Still has plenty of legs, I think.
Mary for Buck Kill was great too. I don't know if we can do that anymore, but maybe we can. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But it was really fun for when we did it. I'll say that. I'll let your silence speak for.
We talked about the Suns. The analysis was fine. We're better at it now than we were then. The Suns are better now than they were then. Yeah. Everything was great.
Yeah.
Now you can talk about the hate round.
Yes. Man, you got me.
Hold on. I forgot. I have one last note.
Okay.
We joked about Chris Paul being traded to the Suns in that segment.
Oh.
I joked about Chris Paul being the return on some dumb trade for I don't remember what.
I have one other note about that too. Sorry, you reminded me. We talked about how we would rather have the Lakers in the playoffs in the first round than in the Western Conference Finals. How prophetic was that comparatively to what happened last season?
And I think that was for the best. If we play the Lakers in the conference finals, I don't know if we beat them last year. I mean, who the hell knows? But if they have a chance to get AD healthy again, I don't know. We didn't. I mean, Sean and I didn't pick them in the first place because we were worried about that scenario.
It was just funny how it turned out. We're like, man, you'd rather get the Lakers in the first round than later, and that was exactly what happened.
Yep.
All right. Hate round.
Before the hate round, I have one more note. Just kidding, I don't. But you really did get. I'm just like jonesing on the buzzer on the secondary segment. I miss it. I want to bring it back. Okay, hate round. There's actually not like a ton to say, although I miss it, and my hates were really bad. And actually, here's what I'll say: all of our hates were a little bit bad, but not the person who did it. It was the reactions, because we'd have somebody say a hate thing, and then more often than not, no one would have a funny comment. It was just rattling off hate, but without the other person being like, oh, that's interesting. You're like, oh, that's stupid. There's no value. It's talk about your dreams. Nobody cares.
A lightning round of hate doesn't work because I said something along the lines of I hate when I wake up in the morning, the sun is right in my eyes and blinds me. It's cool. That's a very a personal thing that has happened to me once. No one can relate to that. Nobody cares. What are you going to do with that? And we're not allowed to have conversation about it afterward because that's not the point of the segment. It was flawed in so many ways.
Okay, so a couple things to fix it. You got to have a little bit of conversation, which we did. We did with a little bit. You also said the things that universally everybody hates. It's don't you hate it when you're in bed and you left the window? I'm already going too specific. Yours are more general than even that. You gotta. I just remember thinking we're just talking about bedtime and all these things that everybody in the world hates.
Don't you hate when you're tired and you have to get up for work in the morning?
Exactly. It's yeah, wow, thanks for that input.
It's stunning how younger me was well, I want to say something that everyone can agree with, and people will like me if I say something everyone agrees with it, and people hate you for doing that. It's
or
weird.
They forget you, one way or the other.
I'm getting such deep psychological analysis on Dave right now, things that I never knew.
25-year-old Dave, that's the difference. 26-year-old Dave, there's a big difference.
Yeah, but for example, I thought you were always in on the joke, and it turns out you were not, and that's really sad. But then again, I was the one getting railed the whole time. So
in that first episode, but that script flipped.
I can't wait to listen to more and see when did it start to change?
Because there was time in between the early episodes. They weren't weekly for the majority of 2011. I think in that time there was this festering hatred that was not for the segment, but for Dave.
No, well, and it was. I think it was more oh, Dave does this, and it's funny. I should look to do this too, and then I did, and I took it too far.
I hate to tell you this, not that I would make an executive decision if the two of you really wanted this to come back. I have no interest in bringing back the hate round.
Oh,
I think it was a terrible ancient relic, and everything it did well on the times it actually worked is done better by hot takes.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to bring it. I think we should do it today just for fun, a throwback. I had no interest. Okay. I would love to bring back some of the secondary segments. I do not need to bring back the hate round. I think we've exposed how flawed actually it was.
The only good thing I'll say about the hate round is it did lead into Buzzer Beater, which is kind of like hot takes, and Buzzer Beater was a good segment for, hey, I've got this thought, let's expand on this thought. Yes. Or hey, I've got this short thing, someone else chimes in, and that works really well.
That was a much better version, and it fit our own show's motif better because the lightning round / hate round was really just a relic from the radio show, and in that, especially with me and Eric and just us, it became very inside joke and very repetitive. It was oh, Jamarcus Russell, oh, the Girl Scouts who didn't give him the right cookie. And it was the same thing every week. And that was fine for the time. I'm not trying to shit on it, but it's if we're going to have a long format like this, we can't be making the same jokes for 509 episodes.
Although the Girl Scouts is kind of funny. I hate the Girl Scouts.
And the ShamWow guy was in there a lot because
Yeah.
he bit off that hooker's tongue, or she bit off his tongue, I think, whatever it was.
Yeah.
There was these repeating things. And Lord knows, like you said, with you and the flying and whatever else, we've had jokes that have lasted. I can't think of any material that has endured this long because it would be stale as fuck by now.
Yeah, and the other flaw, we've exposed a lot of flaws about the hero, and actually, so your bumper, Chris,
I should be on the bad.
is actually.
I keep forgetting to change it because we didn't really follow
Oh
the
my
structure.
god,
It doesn't
my
matter.
face. What was wrong with my face?
Yeah, yeah, I know.
You look anemic.
You
Don't
should have
worry
seen
about
me.
it.
I have the nose the size of Massachusetts. So the
You can see my butt chin.
the butt chin, we brought it back. Well, you don't know about the hate round, probably, although you might be able to figure. We put the sound in post.
Mm-hmm.
So we just had to all kind of stop talking at once and then act surprised about the sound. So we were like, oh man, good thing the sound came in. We put the sound in. We are lying to you. It was all us.
That's not the only time we've lied to the viewers. We're going to get to some more of them, too.
Yeah.
You know this is TikTok now. This is all TikTok is now. It is setting up situations and being like, oh my God, can you believe this guy did this thing? Oh my God, I set this up and did 15 takes, but can you believe this?
Yeah. Yep.
It would be so easy for me to play a live buzzer now. We could
Oh,
do
yeah.
music
We
live. All the stuff would work live in ways that wouldn't have worked even a couple of years ago, but Skype has improved in a couple of areas. I hate saying that because screw Skype. At the time, we just didn't have the ability. The setup just didn't lend itself to that kind of stuff, which really hampered us in trying to make that work because it was really obvious it was done in post. That was the one time where you could tell. Some of the headline transitions sounded okay, even though they were kind of weird how they trailed off. Sometimes they worked. This almost never worked.
Yeah. Yeah. Dave, this picture looks like you got stung by a bunch of bees.
I don't know what's wrong
I'm just
with
going to
it.
leave that comment. I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to leave it there.
Right.
I just want to make sure everyone points out that Chris decided to put my picture on the bad.
That is true because I had two specific notes about people in this, and one of them
That's
was you
great.
talking about bringing things on topic, which we already mentioned.
We did do that.
And the other one was your unwillingness to go along with anything for more than 2 minutes, which we already mentioned. So that was the plan for you with this picture.
It's fair.
And then we went over my bad of having no witticisms at all and just being really drab. I was
don't
very
know.
just like prepared. I had like my bits, and if you guys threw off my bits, I had nothing. I couldn't swerve. I zigged, you zagged. That was it.
Man, how did that change?
I don't know. I probably got
Experience,
more comfortable. That's part
reps.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, reps. I mean, this is huge. Also, like there was probably an element, I will admit, that I cared. Like I wanted people to listen to the show and be like, this Sean guy, pretty smart fellow. I could have a beer with him. And now I'm like, please don't have a beer with me. I don't want it. And I'm stupid.
I'm a huge introvert. Please don't have a beer with
Yeah,
me.
I hate it.
Don't come up to me on an airplane with a beer either. I don't want that.
Yeah, I don't want you to go to me. Trust me, you don't want it either. We're both better off if we don't pursue this relationship any further. And that's where I'm at now. So that probably plays into it a little bit.
Wow.
I haven't changed much.
No, Chris is the exact same.
I've gotten
Oh.
better at hosting. I'm a lot better at putting up with you two idiots sometimes. I've also learned to pick my spots in ways I didn't know back then. And it's weird because I don't need to as much now. With the video format, we have a much better sense of when somebody really wants to make a point. Around the 300-ish mark, I started getting really good at like, all right, they're going to bicker a lot. And so when I talk, I'm going to talk for like 90 seconds because it's my only chance this segment. So I learned how to do that over time. But
And I found something that I know I used to do a lot and I feel like I've cleaned up. But if someone would tell a joke, for some reason I wouldn't actually laugh. I would do,
Well, I didn't know that.
like a dog panting.
Oh,
I don't understand.
but-
Like I'd start laughing, but not actually get laughter out.
and the reason I didn't know is because I never heard it, which is bad because I want your laughter to show like, oh, something's funny, and then we feed off the energy. Because when you make a joke and I laugh, that's like good. If I make a joke and I hear nothing, I'm like, oh god, I suck so bad.
This is hurting me internally. I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
What did I do so wrong?
This is terrible.
So I
Yeah.
mentioned the ways in which you've both changed because I can tell at least some ways I have, and I'm sure I'm blind to others because it's me. So maybe you guys noticed something I didn't. One thing Dave has gotten a lot better at, which does not belong on his bee stung face in the bad, is he had a lot of verbal tics in this episode. Especially when he was fumbling for a word and wasn't sure what he wanted to say. He's gotten both better at knowing what he wants to say and more comfortable doing the show in general. And he's eliminated a lot of these because he had several times where it was like, I think the way I would phrase it is, or I think the thing I would go to was, and it's like he was just filling, and it was words of nothingness mixed into a salad of citrus death.
You know what, though, Dave? That's okay. I still do. I feel like
we all have them. I still end sentences with "so" when I've trailed off and I have nowhere to go to. You know,
me too.
We all have individual tics, and some of that's just the way we talk. It has nothing to do with on-air, off-air experience, whatever. But in this episode in particular, that stood out as like, ooh, like you can tell he's not feeling comfortable.
Yeah, that actually leads to a question of what I want to ask in the outro. So keep that in mind.
Is it now?
No, we got to do a hate round. For a hate round. It's already been an hour. I mean, I guess we're not doing basketball, but
no. Okay, I have a hate round. We'll do a hate round next time.
We'll do it next time. We got plenty of weeks left.
I have great stuff. I hate so much stuff. I went to a wedding this weekend. All I thought about the whole time was how much I hate everything. It was awesome. So I just want to share it with you guys.
I want to go to a wedding.
No, you don't. What? They're the worst.
I love weddings.
No, they're the terrible. They're most like funerals. I understand. I don't. There's just something about like weddings. I don't get. I don't get them.
What?
Yeah, it's like I understand the funeral. Like I get that. I get why it's good for everybody.
What's the thing we used to always say? Save it for the show. Now, I know we're doing the show right now, but save it for the other show.
That's true. Okay.
You're ruining your own bit.
So now we're out of the hate round because there was no hate round. So, Dave, you can ask your question in the outro.
So here's what I want to know from you guys. From doing this show, what do you think you brought from this show into your actual life? I know part of what I've done is re-listening to the thing you just mentioned, Chris, about trying to clean up my verbal tics. I know that instead of saying, well, I think that, or I've been trying to fumble and I fill words, I'll just stop. Okay, I'm going to think of what I want to say, give myself half a second and go.
Yeah.
And secondly, I am used to my own voice, which never was a thing beforehand. But I remember giving a speech at my friend's wedding when I was the best man. And I remember hearing my voice over the loudspeaker and thinking, I'm okay with this. I'm fine with this. I'm used to this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've actually brought a lot, I think. That's one of them, both in talking and just public speaking. So like public speaking, giving a presentation at work, definitely helped. Definitely more comfortable. Definitely can listen to the sound of my own voice. I was the one who hated the sound of my own voice the most. Now I don't give a shit. It has to do with, hating everybody. We already went over that. It's going to sound really cheesy, but I think it's kind of helped me just like be more myself because I kind of found like it can be like fun and like funny when you just like go off the walls and say crazy things that come into my head and becoming more comfortable with that, less worried about how it looks. So I actually think it's benefited me in a lot of ways, just kind of coming out of my introverted shell.
Yeah, it's freeing, so you don't have to worry about things sounding dumb, like confetic.
Yeah.
You just say it.
Exactly.
Which is
see
brilliant.
What happens.
Which is absolutely brilliant. And I just have to comment, I even commented in the chat, damn it, Doug, I know you're right, it's going to happen. Before I start having all my verbal tics again. Mm-hmm. So
you're going to hear yourself and you're going to sort of reincorporate them because I've found, if I watch certain media a lot, like certain podcasts or whatever, I start using some of their sayings. So you're going to start using your own sayings from the past that you hated.
Oh, Doug, everybody's a critic, huh? What? We're going to get Doug on the show and then everybody sit. Here's what we're going to do. Everybody sit. No one say anything. We're just going to let Doug carry the show. And we're just going to see how it goes. But we're not going to tell him we're going to do it ahead of time.
By the way, one thing I think helps is we don't have to fill. We're not stretching. The conversation comes naturally. And as a result, because we know everybody has interesting things to say for the most part, we're not like, okay, I got to step in here. It's my turn to talk, and I'm not really ready for that yet, but I'm going to come up with something. So you fill 5, 10, 15 seconds of like spinning around words trying to find your point. Now you just talk when you have something to say, and that kind of works, turns out.
Yeah. So that's a good lesson for you, Doug, when you carry the show.
Oh, God, he says.
I mean, it's going to be difficult for him to carry the show from the chat section.
No, he'll come and sit over there. They did a Endwalker stream. So now I'm plugging your thing, Chris. Mm-hmm. You did an Endwalker stream, Final Fantasy 14. Nick, Mike, Doug, Chris, good stuff. Check
Mike
that out.
Mike had no microphone.
Wow.
Well, he had one. It wasn't plugged in.
Oh,
Classic.
That's
it's not like he talked anyway.
He didn't
so what
talk
does that
much
matter?
anyways, but he didn't miss much. That's why
Okay.
they're still usable. But yeah, there's 3 different streams of some of the early story content. They're spoilers, but it's very early, so you won't be ruining a lot.
Won't matter to me.
But it could, because if you really want to see what happens in 14, but you can't log into the server because nobody can, well, now you can follow along with the guys.
That's true.
There you go.
Doug already has it. He's plugging his stream in the chat right now.
Doug, you know
Smart.
what?
Link the video, Doug.
Joke's on me. Doug's way better than I am.
Link the video.
Damn it!
Grab the YouTube
Did
link.
not see that
Yeah,
coming.
he's ready to host, turns
Shit.
out.
He kicked me off my own show.
By the way, my final verdict, Dave has changed more.
I would probably agree with that. That's what I'm telling you. Like, I didn't change all that much, although,
No.
like, in some ways. But Dave,
You kind of came out of your shell, like you mentioned.
yeah, Dave's
but
like a 180.
What's funny is I probably agree with you, but also my voice has changed maybe the least out of the 3 of us. Sean's has changed the most by far.
That's
Sean's
probably
voice
true.
Yeah. And
I
mine's
don't know
gotten more
what-
strained because I still have my tonsils, so that's a thing.
Oh, well. I don't know what voice you had before, Sean. It's not the Sean I know now.
It's so much better now.
Well, and again,
Yes,
go listen to
absolutely.
the old radio show.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like Sean, especially to us who know him, but it doesn't.
You were like speaking from the back of your throat almost. It sounded like you were just really old and scared of what you had to say and you didn't know what to do next.
Yeah, you got a diaphragm.
Because I was trying to sound cool.
Mm.
I'm telling you, I bet you half of that was like me trying to be like, I'm like cool and snarky. And so what I'm going to say is insightful, but kind of funny. And it wasn't either of those at all. And so now I'm like, whatever.
Ironically, it was not in any way, shape, or form that. So that's funny.
And I had the benefit of I talked to myself a ton as a kid, and I had done the radio show for a few months before we even set off on this endeavor. So I was already used to hearing my own voice, at least for the most part, and more comfortable with it. So I've never really had that in a way that's been recorded. I think I sound better now. I have better energy levels, and I'm a little bit more cohesive in making a point. But the difference is not that stark for me, I don't think.
But it's okay. You came with the most.
And the one thing Dave was the same on, he complained about the cost of DLC in this episode, and he still does today.
That reminds me, I tried to define what DLC was. I'm like, we need to make sure we say that it's a downloadable content
Yeah, and
for
then you
those
did
who
it
don't
every
understand.
time after, too.
Now, DLC was relatively new then. I mean, that's a PS3, Xbox 360 era thing for the most part. It has still been around for like 3 or 4 years, and gamers were familiar with the parlance,
Yeah.
but...
I was like, DLC. Dave was like, that's downloadable content, please. And I was like, okay, right. So now that we have it, I can say DLC. And then you kept saying downloadable content every time. It's like, why even establish earlier that it was DLC if you're just going to say the whole thing every time?
I mean, why say in 3 syllables what you can say in 6?
I think at the time, I was not familiar with that term whatsoever, which is weird to think of now.
It's pervasive now.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost a bad word.
Dave's like,
Well-
I don't want to pay $2 a song for DLC. I'm
I
like,
said $10.
here we go.
To be fair, it wasn't a billionaire yet. So
Still
that
not.
had something to do with it.
I'm actually way poorer than you, Sean. Now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
in
that's
in-
not true because
in
you're rich
spirit
in
and in
spirit
money.
and in good looks.
Oh.
So there you go. And look at the beard. Look at my beard. It sucks.
What
I had
beard?
a lot of fun doing this, and I think we should do it again. And it doesn't have to be next episode, and it doesn't also have to be episode 2, although we could. But it was really fun. And I like going back and taking notes. It was kind of fun to actually just for myself to re-listen to the old stuff.
Yep. No, I mean, if whatever next episode is, we have to do an end of the year thing. It's a thing to do end of the year thing.
Do have to do it at the end of the year, and I'm getting ready
Yeah.
for that.
There is a question mark on top of the screen as we wrap things up here. I don't know what's happening for the holidays exactly yet. We're going to take one of the next 2 Tuesdays off. I don't know which one yet. So we might be back next Tuesday, the 21st. If we're not, and you don't see a show pop up on your YouTube feed because you're subscribed, right? Then you'll know that we're probably
Yeah,
just going to be on the 28th instead.
Smash that bell.
Yeah,
Bunch of fucking
get the
assholes.
notifications.
Next week, I can do it. So if you're waiting on me,
It's probably me. If
Oh.
I'm going to be out of town because of the holidays, then
Yes.
I don't think anybody else can run the show.
I would,
Especially nowadays.
yeah,
There's
I
a lot of
certainly
moving parts.
yeah, no.
But one way or the other, we're going to have one more episode left through the end of the year. We also typically do the reviews as the first one of January. So in theory, either way, that's going to be 3 weeks out from now where we do our best of for 2021. Going to be an interesting year. There's a lot to choose from. I think it's a stronger year than last year. We know why that is for the most part. But we'll see. We only had movies really the last half of the year, for example, but we didn't have any of the second half of last year. So I don't know how it all looks. We'll see.
Yeah. So cool.
Also, there's only 16 days left in this year.
Yeah. That's wild.
We've had a whole year of pandemic time, and now who knows what 2022 looks like thanks to Omicron and who knows what else.
You know what? But it's like crunch time for me because I'm trying to fit in, like, because I chronicle like the books, movies, games played in a year. So it's like crunch time right now. It's a very busy, Dave, I'm sure you can relate. Work is busy. I'm also busy trying to fit in all these movies and books into crunch time, you know?
I hate you.
You know how I can get at the end of the year, everything, like you just want to get it. You got to meet the quota.
I hate you right now so much.
Harsh but fair. If only I had an outro song to play us out.
Bum, 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 bum.
To play us out? What does that mean? To play us out. That's the end of this episode. In between shows, you can find us on our website, objectionnetwork.com or at youtube.com/objectionnetwork. Shout out to my brother for showing up tonight. I see you in the chat. I'm not ignoring you. I do put up with you. I'm just that guy.
Oh, that's who it is.
Yes.
Awesome.
Now
Hello.
you know.
Welcome.
Goodbye.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
No, what were you gonna say?
We'll talk. We're
on
next week.
limitless time. We don't have to keep it to an hour.
We'll
anymore.
talk next week.
Oh, okay. Yes, next week. Okay. Goodbye forever.